Rip. The sound tore through the first-class cabin like a gunshot wrapped in velvet. Two halves of a pristine boarding pass fluttered to the floor. "You don't belong here," Gwen said, her voice cool as steel. The flight attendant's blue uniform didn't flinch. Her eyes didn't move. She stood tall, calm, like she'd just performed a routine check. But the woman standing in front of her wasn't just any passenger. She was Marla Whitmore. She said nothing, not a single word, just stood still, letting the judgment hang in the air. She didn't yell, she didn't argue, she didn't even blink. She just reached slowly into her coat pocket and took out her phone. "Tell us where you're watching from." The screen fades in below, while the camera lingers on her unshaken expression. Because 5 minutes from now, this woman would fire the entire crew and freeze $920 million. Earlier that morning, the sky over Narita Airport was still dark, tinged with soft grays and quiet wind. Flight PA-17 to Seattle was boarding early, a long-haul trans-Pacific luxury route operated by Pacific Aero, an airline known more for its polished branding than its internal ethics. Marla Whitmore, 61, walked calmly through the boarding bridge in flat shoes and a soft cream sweater. No makeup, no assistant, no briefcase. Only a small carry-on, a black passport wallet, and a boarding pass that read, "Whitmore, Marla, Seat 2A, First Class." To everyone else in that hallway, she looked like someone's aunt heading home after a family reunion. Someone who got lucky with an upgrade. But Marla knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't just flying home. She was running a silent audit. The first-class cabin was serene. Mood lighting, champagne flutes, and expensive silence. Gwen, the head flight attendant, stood tall at the threshold of luxury, guarding it like a gatekeeper in navy blue. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Marla step inside. "Good morning," Marla said, offering her boarding pass. Gwen looked down, then up, then down again. Something shifted in her face. "I'm going to need you to step aside," she said flatly. "I'm in 2A, Marla replied. "I don't think so." Gwen didn't bother lowering her voice. "This section is reserved for premium passengers." Marla blinked. "That's what the ticket says." Gwen stared for another second. Then, with sharp, deliberate movements, she tore the boarding pass in half and let the pieces fall to the carpet. A low gasp slipped out from behind one of the other seats. Marla stood motionless. "Ma'am, this isn't for people like you," Gwen added. "You'd be much more comfortable back in economy." Marla didn't speak. Not out of shock. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because she had learned, after 40 years of boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions, that some moments required silence louder than words. She slowly bent down and picked up the two torn halves of the ticket. Behind her, a young male attendant, Logan, no older than 26, walked over and let out a chuckle. "Seriously?" he said to Gwen. "She thought that outfit was going to get her in first class?" Then he looked straight at Marla. "No offense, ma'am, but jeans and a grandma sweater? Next time you want to play rich, at least try." Marla lifted her eyes to his. She didn't flinch. Then, with perfect calm, she reached into her jacket pocket and retrieved a black metal card. Platinum tier, engraved with Whitmore Global Equity. Founding member, platinum status. She held it out toward Gwen. Gwen didn't touch it, didn't even glance. "We've seen fakes before," she muttered. "It's not about a card. It's about who belongs here." Another moment passed. Marla slowly tucked the card away, then pulled out her phone. She dialed one number, one ring. Then a voice picked up. "Jennifer, code red line, Pacific Aero, confirm activation." No yelling, no threat, no warning. She ended the call, slid the phone back into her coat, and calmly stepped into seat 2A, yes, still empty, like nothing had happened. Logan looked confused. Gwen looked unsettled. She leaned in. "Who exactly did you just call?" Marla didn't answer. 2 rows back, a travel blogger from Singapore quietly raised her phone and began filming. Another passenger whispered, "Did that woman just get her ticket ripped up for no reason?" A buzz started in the cabin. Low, electric, like a storm building under layers of carpet and leather. Gwen moved closer. "I'm asking you to leave first class now, or we'll have security remove you." Marla turned her head slowly. "You can try." She didn't say it as a threat. She said it as a fact. The curtain to the cockpit opened. Captain Jeff, a white-haired man with a rigid jawline and zero curiosity, stepped out. "What's the issue here?" he asked, annoyed. Gwen gestured. "She forged her way into first class." Captain Jeff didn't ask for details. "Remove her." That's when Marla stood, but not to leave. She turned toward Gwen, Logan, and Captain Jeff, looked each of them dead in the eye, and said, "In 5 minutes, none of you will work here anymore." Then sat back down. It wasn't a threat. It was a prophecy. And it was already in motion. Because Jennifer, the woman on the phone, wasn't just her assistant. She was the executive director of Ethos Corps, the global ethics compliance system adopted by over 60 international airports and 8 funding networks. And Marla? Marla was the final gatekeeper, the last signature, the woman whose approval decided whether airlines lived or died under ethics review. And now, Pacific Aero had just failed the test. 5 minutes earlier, before the ticket tore and the silence turned electric, Marla Whitmore stood alone in Narita International Airport, unnoticed, unbothered, and completely in control. She didn't need to dress like power to be power. Not today. She wasn't here to be celebrated. She was here to witness. The waiting lounge outside Gate 17 was quiet at dawn. Floor-to-ceiling glass let in a soft wash of blue Tokyo morning, and the business travelers barely spoke. Suits, silk scarves, glowing laptops. Everyone around her looked like someone. No one looked at her. Marla sat in a corner chair, reading quietly from a leather notebook. Its pages were filled with handwritten notes, all in her looping, deliberate cursive. Words like bias flag, ticket denial protocol, and direct observation, necessary. In the center of the page, circled twice, Pacific Aero Internal Ethics Audit. Code, red line ready. She looked out toward the tarmac. Flight PA-17 was prepping for boarding. The jet's metallic logo shimmered in the early light. Pacific Aero, fly with confidence. Marla's lips curled slightly. Confidence, we'll see. It had started 3 months earlier. Emails, phone calls, anonymous reports from crew members and passengers. People of color who had paid full fare, many of them in first class, routinely being accidentally downgraded. Denied access, labeled as fraud risks. Some had their boarding passes voided at the gate with no apology. One woman, a cancer patient flying home after chemotherapy, was told her seat had accidentally been reassigned to a higher-tier customer. Too many of the victims were quiet, tired, embarrassed. But Marla didn't do silence when it came to injustice. She'd spent her career building Whitmore Global Equity, a powerhouse ESG investment firm managing over $18 billion in capital. But beyond the money, beyond the boardrooms, she had a deeper mission: to change what power looked like and who got to hold it. That's why she co-authored the Ethos Corps Standard 5 years ago, an international ethics index designed to measure fairness, bias, and inclusion across major airlines. Today, 63 airports and 8 global funds depended on that index before approving contracts or releasing capital. Marla had the final signature, and now she had reason to believe Pacific Aero had rigged their scores. The company's leadership had dismissed the whistleblowers as confused, emotional, or misinterpreting standard procedures. They'd staged internal audits, always conveniently timed. They'd even claimed sensitive situations were mishandled by low-level employees. It was the kind of polished evasion Marla had seen 1,000 times before. So she skipped the meetings, skipped the memos, and booked a flight under her real name, with zero corporate identification. If they were treating strangers differently, she was about to become a stranger. At 5:22 a.m., Marla stood at gate 17, ticket in hand, boarding call in progress. No one from Pacific Aero recognized her. She made sure of it. She wore soft-soled shoes. No heels. A cream sweater. No jewelry. Her carry-on was ordinary black canvas. Her only luxury was the quiet steel in her posture, the way she moved like someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to hide. The boarding pass was legit. Seat 2A, first class, $7,400 USD, purchased in full. As she walked down the jet bridge, a middle-aged white man ahead of her gave a small nod, half smile. He didn't recognize her either. He didn't expect to. People like him never thought people like her were people like her. And that was the point. The test wasn't about attention. It was about treatment. What would they do to someone who didn't look like power, but quietly was? She entered the aircraft at 5:31 a.m. The cabin glowed like a luxury spa. Every seat was upholstered in cream Italian leather. There was a soft, ambient mist in the air, jasmine and mint. Flight attendants moved like ballet dancers rehearsed to perfection. That is, until they saw her. Gwen was the first face. Marla clocked the change immediately. The polite professionalism sharpened into cold calculation. Gwen's posture stiffened. Her smile went from corporate to performative. The moment Gwen looked at her boarding pass, her eyes said it all. There's no way this is real. And then she tore it. Back in 2A, in the present, Marla sat in silence, watching Gwen pace nervously down the aisle. Logan whispered something near the galley. Captain Jeff hadn't returned to the cockpit. The energy had changed. People felt it, even if they didn't understand it yet. Marla pressed her fingers together and closed her eyes. She thought of her father, Theodore Whitmore, a former Tuskegee airman who had once been removed from a train car in Virginia for looking too proud. He hadn't fought back with fists. He'd waited, graduated from MIT, and bought the land the railroad cut through. You don't always raise your voice to make noise, he used to say. You raise your standards. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She pulled it out. A text from Jennifer. Red line initiated 4 airports flagged ESG chain review in motion 920 pending freeze in 3.5 minutes. Marla's expression didn't change. In seat 3B, a young woman with a phone was still recording. This time, not just the tension, but the stillness. Marla's stillness. The kind of composure people weren't used to seeing from women, especially not older black women, and especially not when insulted. That's what made it powerful. She didn't scream. She didn't protest. She just acted. Across the world, as Pacific Aero's systems quietly flickered under the weight of an incoming audit, Marla's name had begun to ripple through closed circles. People were calling one another. Did you hear? She's on a flight right now. Who let this happen? One compliance director dropped his coffee when the text came in. Red line authenticated. Pacific Aero. Origin, Whitmore. Back in the sky, seat 2A remained quiet. Marla placed the 2 torn halves of her ticket gently into the seat back pocket. Not out of sentiment, but as evidence. For the record, the flight hadn't taken off yet, but the downfall had already begun. Logan leaned against the galley wall like it was a high school hallway, and he was the class clown with a name tag. She seriously thinks she belongs up here? He whispered, not very quietly, to Gwen. I mean, jeans? A cardigan? I've seen better dressed people working airport coffee counters. He laughed. Gwen didn't, not because she disagreed, but because, for the first time in years, she wasn't totally sure of herself. Marla sat in seat 2A, silent and composed, staring out the oval window as the Tokyo sunrise cut gold into the clouds. Her legs were crossed, her phone tucked back in her coat. She hadn't spoken a word since that call, and somehow that made it worse for the crew. Because people who yell can be dismissed. People who sit still after being humiliated are dangerous. Gwen walked past her again, pretending to check inventory, but mostly just watching. Logan followed close behind, smirking like the sidekick in a bad sitcom. "I don't know why she's making this hard," Gwen muttered. "She's got nothing to stand on." "Maybe she's hoping we'll fold," Logan said. Gwen paused. Then she really doesn't know who she's dealing with. Just then, a soft ding came from the cockpit. Captain Jeff stepped back out. His posture said, authority. His eyes said, "Don't bother me." He scanned the cabin, noted the quiet tension, then zeroed in on Gwen. "What's the delay?" he asked flatly. Gwen straightened. "We have an unauthorized passenger in 2A. The ticket was forged." "Removed?" "I've tried, but she's not cooperating." Jeff looked over at Marla. Didn't even bother hiding his disdain. "We don't have time for games," he muttered. He turned to Gwen. "Escort her off, or I'll call security." From 4A, a man in a tailored navy suit coughed awkwardly. He looked toward Marla, then toward the crew. "She hasn't raised her voice. She hasn't caused trouble," the man said gently. "Maybe you should just check again?" Gwen shot him a sharp look. "Sir, please mind your own seat." The man raised his palms and leaned back, but his eyes stayed on Marla. Something about her didn't match the crew's story, and he wasn't the only one wondering. Logan walked toward Marla now, standing beside her seat like he was about to scold a child. "Ma'am, this is your last warning," he said, trying to sound firm. "Either return to your assigned seat in economy, or you will be physically removed." Marla didn't even turn her head. "I suggest," she said quietly, "you choose your next action very carefully." Logan scoffed. Or what? He didn't get an answer. But Gwen saw something shift in the cabin. Passengers who'd previously kept their heads down were now watching, whispering, pulling out phones. A few had already started recording. Gwen pulled Logan aside. "This is getting out of hand." "No, what's out of hand is her ego," he snapped. "You let one passenger pull this, and the whole system falls apart." "She's just one woman." "Exactly. But just one row behind them. A woman in her 30s with long brown hair and a DSLR slung around her neck quietly activated the lens. Her name was Cassie Thorne, a freelance journalist who covered social equity, ethics, and travel, and had just come from a human rights conference in Seoul. She hadn't spoken a word, but she had seen everything, and she'd been filming since the moment the ticket was torn. Back at the front, Captain Jeff was dialing into the terminal. "Get security to gate 17, he said into the mic. "Passenger refusing to vacate first class, possibly hostile." Marla blinked slowly and exhaled. The quiet ache of disbelief had long passed. What sat in her chest now was something deeper. Not anger, not offense. Confirmation. Everything she had suspected about Pacific Aero was playing out in real time, like a case study of institutional bias wrapped in airline uniforms. She wasn't here to provoke them. She'd simply given them enough rope. And they were hanging themselves. Her phone buzzed again. "Jennifer, ESG alert sent 3 platforms suspended ticket listings 1.5 million to full freeze." In the cabin, the air had changed. Gwen felt it. Logan didn't. She tried to reclaim the situation. "Ma'am," Gwen said, more rigid now, "you have refused to comply with crew instructions, and as such, we are requesting airport security to escort you from this aircraft." Several phones rose higher now, clearly capturing the moment. Marla finally turned her head. Her voice, quiet as a feather, carried louder than shouting. "You'll regret that." Logan grinned. "Is that a threat?" Marla stared at him, level and firm. "No, that's a fact." Seconds later, the front door of the plane reopened, and 2 airport security officers stepped in. A woman in her 40s, badge on her belt. A man behind her, younger, holding a tablet. The woman, Officer Ryland, approached Gwen. "You made the call?" Gwen nodded. "That's her, 2A. Ryland turned toward Marla, but before she could speak, her tablet buzzed. She frowned, glanced down, and her brow furrowed. Behind her, The male officer's earpiece chimed. He turned pale. Officer Ryland," he whispered. "We've got something. Big." "What?" "Emergency notice from Port Authority. CEO-level ethics breach triggered. Subject, Pacific Aero. Flagged by Marla Whitmore." Ryland blinked, looked at Marla, then looked again. And everything about her stance, her calm, her stillness, suddenly made sense. "You're that Marla Whitmore?" Marla gave her the smallest nod. The security officer slowly turned toward Gwen and Logan. "You just made the mistake of your careers." Gwen's face went blank. Logan's smirk vanished. Passengers audibly gasped. One woman actually clapped a hand over her mouth. The man in 4A whispered, "Oh my God." Cassie lowered her camera and said softly, "Oh, this is going global." Marla stood up, not angrily, not dramatically. She adjusted the collar of her sweater and addressed the security team. "I'm not the one who needs to be escorted off this flight," she said clearly. "They are." Then she looked toward Gwen, toward Logan, toward Captain Jeff, now standing halfway down the aisle, trying to pretend he hadn't watched it all unravel. She said 5 simple words. "This flight just got grounded." And then she sat down. Cassie Thorne's hands trembled just slightly as she uploaded the video, not from fear, but from adrenaline. She knew what she had, and she knew it was going to change something. 1 minute and 41 seconds of footage. One woman, silently enduring humiliation. One crew, arrogantly assuming they'd win. The caption she typed was simple. "I saw this with my own eyes. This isn't how you treat people." Red line ethics, hatch Pacific Aero. She hit post. 30 seconds later, the video had 2,400 views. In 2 minutes, it hit 8,100. In 5, it was on the trending page in 3 countries. The comment section exploded. "Did that attendant just rip her ticket?" She said nothing, and somehow still looked more powerful than everyone else there. "Wait, is this the Marla Whitmore? CEO Whitmore, the ESG fund founder?" Someone stitched the clip with a screenshot of Marla speaking at the UN Climate Forum. Another added a video of Marla's 2018 TED Talk titled, "The Ethics of Invisible Power." The internet had connected the dots. Back inside Flight PA-17, the curtain between cabins hadn't moved, but the energy had shifted entirely. Whispers, eyes darting, phones held just low enough to look innocent. Even Gwen could feel it. She turned toward the galley, checking her reflection in the metallic coffee panel. Her lipstick had smudged slightly. She wiped it, then fixed her name badge, as if that could re-anchor her authority. But it was slipping fast. Logan paced behind her. "This is getting weird," he muttered. "You think? I thought she was just being difficult. But people are watching, like watching. Gwen exhaled. "Then we do what we always do. Stay firm, stay procedural." "She's not just some passenger." "Doesn't matter." Logan hesitated. "Unless it does." Marla sat in 2A, untouched. She hadn't moved, not even to sip the water that now sat sweating on her tray table. The 2 security officers, Ryland and Cortez, stood quietly near the front exit. Neither made eye contact with her. Neither had asked her to move again. They'd seen enough. Captain Jeff returned to the cockpit, closing the door harder than necessary. He wanted no part of what was happening. He didn't know how this woman had leverage, but he knew the situation was out of his hands, and more importantly, beyond his comprehension. At 7:18 a.m. Seattle time, Jennifer Lee, Marla's chief operations officer, walked into a private conference room at Whitmore Global Equity headquarters. She didn't wait for pleasantries. "Activate full ethics strike," she told her team. "Coordinate with Ethos Core, all access tiers. No delays, no calls, no negotiations." A moment later, 7 screens lit up in front of her, each showing a red waveform labeled Ethics Violation, Pacific Aero, Code Red Line. Within 2 minutes, $920 million in ESG-linked capital was frozen across 3 major investment arms. 4 international airports received real-time alerts to suspend gate priority and reassign runways. 2 online booking platforms delisted Pacific Aero for ethics hold review. Compliance departments from 3 partner airlines called in confused, then panicked. Jennifer didn't blink. She simply looked down at her phone, tracking the flight's current altitude. Still grounded, still on the tarmac in Tokyo. Exactly where they should be, she whispered. Back on the plane, a middle-aged Korean woman in 3C leaned slightly forward toward Marla. Her English was soft, but her voice was firm. "I saw what they did. I'm so sorry." Marla turned to her slowly, offering a small nod. Nothing more, but enough to make the woman's eyes well up. Gwen saw it. She also saw the woman in 4D recording again, and the teenager in 5A whispering something to his father, and the man in 1C typing furiously on LinkedIn. Something was unraveling, and she was still pretending it wasn't. "Do something," Logan hissed to her. "Say something." Gwen's jaw clenched. "Like what? I don't know, we can't just stand here." She straightened her blazer, stepped toward Marla, and dropped her voice low. "Ms. Whitmore, I think we've all had some misunderstandings this morning." Marla blinked slowly. Gwen continued. "Perhaps we could agree to de-escalate. No need for further action." Marla raised a brow. "Further action?" Gwen gave a brittle smile. "This could be resolved privately." "This was never private," Marla said quietly. "You made it public the second you tore my ticket." At that moment, Cassie Thorne's second video dropped online. The caption this time, "The woman they tried to remove? She runs the system that's about to shut them down." It hit 1.2 million views in under 30 minutes. Screenshots were circulating of Gwen's face, Logan's smirk, Captain Jeff's dismissal. Someone posted Marla's 2009 Harvard keynote. "The most dangerous assumption in power is to believe you'll never be held accountable." Underneath it, a reply. Today she proved she meant it. In seat 4A, an older black man quietly wiped the corners of his eyes. "I didn't think I'd live to see this," he whispered to no one in particular. The intercom crackled. A nervous flight attendant, not Gwen, announced a delay due to technical review. It was a lie. Everyone knew it. The truth was sitting in 2A with her hands folded in her lap, calm as ever. At 7:34 a.m., the CEO of Pacific Aero called Jennifer. He never got through. At 7:36, the board called Marla's office directly. Not her assistant, not her staff. Her line. Jennifer answered. "We'd like to initiate a formal review." "It's already done," Jennifer replied. The line went quiet. Then one voice asked, "Can we recover from this?" Jennifer's answer was calm. "You should ask Gwen Anderson and Logan Trent if they think so." Click. Back in the cabin, Gwen received a ping on her tablet. At first, she thought it was a system update. Then she read the subject line. "Notice of termination, immediate ethics breach. Employee, Gwen Anderson." Below it, "Flight crew member, Logan Trent. Access revoked. Security protocol initiated." She went pale. Logan, looking over her shoulder, started to curse under his breath. Gwen looked up toward Marla. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. A final ding rang across the cabin. Captain Jeff stepped out again, but this time he didn't speak, because he didn't know what to say. Gwen didn't cry. She wouldn't. Even as the words "notice of termination" stared back at her from the crew tablet. Even as Logan muttered every curse he knew while yanking his carry-on from the overhead bin. Even as passengers turned, some quietly recording, others just staring. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, she adjusted her blazer, stood tall, and said to no one in particular, "It's a system glitch. They'll fix it." But deep down, she knew this wasn't a glitch. This was a message. And it had Marla Whitmore's fingerprints all over it. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Pacific Aero's Seattle HQ was in chaos. Conference rooms buzzed with overlapping voices. Legal advisors scribbled furiously. Someone knocked over a coffee tray. No one even looked down. The COO, Gregory Hale clutched a printed email from Ethos Core. Severe violation. Passenger ethics red line triggered. Tier 3 breach. He looked up, pale. If this isn't contained, we're looking at nearly $920 million in frozen ESG funding. Before anyone could respond, investor relations rushed in, breathless. Skyscape just delisted us. BookJet too. That's 61% of our direct traffic bookings gone. Gregory didn't blink. Gate slots? Suspended in Gatwick, Incheon, LAX, and CDG, all citing ethics non-compliance. For the first time in his career, Gregory Hale was speechless. Back on flight PA-17, Logan zipped his bag and walked out of the galley without a word to Gwen. Not even a glance. Not even a nod. He walked straight past Marla Whitmore, who sat silent in 2A, as composed as if nothing had happened. But he knew, everyone knew, the silence was power. The silence had flipped the entire airline upside down. Marla hadn't touched her water, hadn't moved an inch. She didn't need to, because outside the aircraft, the consequences were moving faster than any jet engine. A soft chime came over the intercom. The captain's voice cracked faintly as he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently experiencing an unexpected compliance hold. Please remain seated. We appreciate your patience." Translation: we are being held because we made a catastrophic mistake. Online, the second wave of news was already erupting. Breaking: Pacific Aero faces 900 freeze following onboard ethics scandal. CEO Marla Whitmore was the passenger, red line protocol engaged. Airline suspended from Global Ethics Consortium pending investigation. One tweet summed it up best. They messed with the woman who built the system that's now destroying them. Gwen finally sat down, not in the jump seat, but in 3B, next to a man who subtly shifted away from her. She opened her phone. 48 missed notifications, 14 from her supervisor, 6 from her union repee. She didn't reply. She didn't know what to say. Instead, she looked forward at Marla. "Was this all planned?" Gwen asked quietly. Marla didn't answer at first. Then, with the calmness of someone utterly in control, she said, "No, but your actions made it very easy." 20 minutes later, the cabin door opened. This time, it wasn't catering or ground staff. It was 2 federal compliance officers in dark gray suits. The tension snapped like a string. They walked straight to Marla. "Ms. Whitmore," one said, "we've confirmed your clearance. Are you ready to proceed with executive seizure?" Marla stood with quiet grace. "I've said what I needed to say." She turned to Gwen and Logan, who were now both standing near the galley, attempting to mask their rising panic. And with the calm finality of a CEO delivering a last boardroom verdict, she said, "You didn't just lose your jobs. You fired yourselves." Phones came out like clockwork. Someone was already live streaming. A mother in row 5 whispered to her teenage son, "This is what real power looks like." Passengers began to clap, slow, respectful. As Marla stepped off the plane, a man in business class quietly said, "She didn't raise her voice once." A woman whispered, "She didn't need to." By the time Marla walked into the terminal, the world had caught up. She was trending globally. Hashtag Whitmore. Redline. Ethics in air. Hashtag not your seat. Inside Pacific Aero HQ, the boardroom had turned into damage control central. Legal, PR, crisis communications, external affairs, all scrambling to salvage what they could. Someone said, "Call her, apologize." But the CEO's phone had already been cut off, and Marla wasn't taking calls because it was too late for apologies. This wasn't just a personal retaliation. This was a systemic reset. And every airline exec watching from the sidelines now knew one thing: you never, ever disrespect the architect of the rules. By the time Marla reached her penthouse suite in Manhattan, the world had changed. The sun had set hours ago, but the city below buzzed like it was midday. News tickers raced across buildings. Headlines flared on every screen in Times Square. Twitter was still melting. She didn't take the elevator to the top floor. She owned the entire building. The glass doors slid open to silence, except for one soft chime from her assistant's tablet. 172 interviews declined, 4 requests from the White House, 3 urgent calls from the FAA. Marla set her bag down and walked straight to the bar. Sparkling water, nothing stronger. She never drank when she was shaping policy, and tonight she would reshape the industry. Elsewhere, at Pacific Aero's downtown HQ, the board was still awake. The emergency meeting had entered its 6th hour. COO Gregory Hale, now tieless and pale, stared at the wall-sized projection. Active red line freeze, 920 malum in ESG funding on indefinite hold. 4 major booking platforms delisted. 19 airport gate access points suspended. "Do we know how long she can hold us hostage?" someone snapped. "It's not a hostage situation," Legal replied grimly. "She's executing a regulatory breach protocol. You agreed to this in the Ethos Corps Charter 2 years ago." Another exec groaned. "We didn't know she wrote that clause." Gregory dropped his head into his hands. Everybody's learning that the hard way today. Back in her suite, Marla sat in front of 3 screens. To her left, a live feed of airport cancellations. To her right, internal memos from the airline's legal team, obtained, legally, through public filings. And in the center, a video. Grainy footage. Someone on the flight had captured it. Gwen's hand, the ripped ticket, the words, "You don't belong here." The video had already hit 11.6 million views, and climbing. But Marla didn't smile. She didn't need to. She was already in phase 2. She opened a secured dashboard, the same one only 5 people in the country had access to. Ethos Corps, Passenger Integrity Tier Panel, she tapped once, confirming the red line deviation audit trigger. Then again. Executive action initiated. Allied Industry Ethics Review now in progress. 3 minutes later, systems began to cascade across 4 partner airlines. It had begun. The next morning, the FAA called a press conference. Cameras, flags, suits. "We are launching a federal review into systemic bias in commercial aviation," the speaker said. Reporters flooded the feed with questions. One cut through the noise. "Is this because of what happened to Marla Whitmore?" The spokesperson didn't flinch. "We don't comment on private citizens, but we do act when a CEO uses her legal power to trigger a regulatory firestorm." Gwen watched the conference from her apartment couch. She hadn't left home in 17 hours. Her phone was still buzzing. Union reps, media, even her cousin who hadn't called in years. But all Gwen could hear was that voice. "You just fired yourselves." She tried to log into her employee dashboard again. Still locked. Then she saw it. "Your ethics standing has been flagged as non-compliant. You are no longer eligible for service in FAA-regulated cabins." Gwen's breath caught. This wasn't just a firing. This was a blacklist. Meanwhile, Logan was trying to lawyer up. But none of the aviation firms would touch him. His name was already on the internal no-hire list passed quietly between major carriers. It was unofficial, of course, but he knew what it meant. "I didn't even say anything," he told his reflection in the bathroom mirror. "It was her. I just stood there." And for the first time, Logan realized that was exactly the problem. While the old system crumbled, Marla was already building something new. She drafted a document titled Passenger Ethics Mandate, a public-private accord for dignity in aviation. It proposed a national protocol where crew behavior, passenger treatment, and in-flight interactions would be reviewed through anonymized AI audit logs, monitored by an independent ethics board. No yelling, no biased profiling, no gatekeeping dignity based on skin tone or income, and above all, no retaliation without consequence. She sent the draft to her legal team, and then to the White House liaison, who had been politely calling since 6 a.m. It didn't take long for the response. "We'd like to discuss this at the Transportation Ethics Forum next week. Will you be our keynote speaker?" Marla replied with one word, "Yes." A day later, Gwen sat across from a journalist in a tiny coffee shop in Queens. The reporter tapped record. "Tell us your side of the story." Gwen looked down. Her voice was smaller than she remembered. "I didn't think it would go that far." she said. I mean, I didn't know who she was. She looked regular. The reporter raised an eyebrow. Is that why you denied her the seat? No, Gwen said too quickly. I didn't deny her. I just enforced the rules. And the ripping of the ticket? Gwen stared blankly, because there was no good answer to that. Marla never responded publicly. No interviews, no press statements, no social media posts. She didn't need to speak. The system spoke for her. 2 weeks later, the board of Pacific Aero voted to suspend international operations, pending ethics stabilization. Investors pulled out. Their CEO stepped down. And the FAA confirmed that Pacific Aero would be required to adopt Marla's full ethics framework before regaining any flight rights in U.S. airspace. When asked if she felt vindicated, Marla told her assistant, "This wasn't about revenge. It was about the future. If I have to burn one airline to build a better sky, so be it." When Marla entered the Transportation Ethics Forum in Washington, D.C., the room went silent. Not in fear, in respect. Every airline executive, regulator, investor, and media outlet in that conference hall knew exactly who she was now. The woman who didn't yell, didn't post, didn't sue, but brought an entire system to its knees in 5 minutes. She took the stage without a single note. No flashy PowerPoint, no entourage. Only her and her voice. "I don't need to tell you what happened," Marla began. "You all watched it. You all felt it." The room was still. This wasn't about a seat or a ticket or even a single flight. This was about a sickness in the air. A culture where power thinks it knows what worth looks like. She scanned the room, not judging, not attacking, just holding the silence. I didn't trigger Redline to punish one crew. I triggered it because I could no longer wait for your apologies. 30 seconds of applause, then standing, then national coverage. The next day, 5 major airlines signed the Ethos Core Passenger Integrity Accord, an ethics mandate built directly from Marla's draft. That same week, Gwen received a letter from the Civil Rights Aviation Review Board. She had been cited. An official statement of bias-induced misconduct during FAA-regulated service. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was worse. It was a permanent mark on her aviation career. She sat alone on her stoop in Queens, rereading the document. She wanted to scream, blame, deny, but there it was, in print. Subject exhibited profiling behavior inconsistent with Department of Transportation equity regulations. Recommended, disqualification from federally aligned cabin service. She closed the envelope and whispered, "I didn't even know she was a CEO." And somehow, that made it worse. Meanwhile, Logan was in Atlanta, working a temp gig moving cargo on overnight shifts. He never told his family why he left the airline. He never explained why his badge stopped working. But every time someone asked him why he quit, he lied. Because the truth was too simple and too humiliating. He had stood by and said nothing. And in Marla's system, silence was no longer safe. At Pacific Aero's shattered headquarters, what was once a leading carrier was now reduced to crisis salvage operations. The airline had lost 37% of its gate access globally. Its ESG partnerships were void. Shareholders had filed a class action lawsuit, and now a Senate hearing had been scheduled. The headline said it all. How one black CEO redefined power in the sky. Marla, meanwhile, had quietly resumed work at Whitmore Systems. No interviews, no self-congratulations. Her company's ethics platform had now been adopted by 7 additional airlines, including 2 international carriers. And yet, she kept her schedule light. She only took one meeting that week, one that no one expected. It was with Melinda Yates, CEO of NorthJet Airlines, the same airline whose board had once voted to bypass her for a position years ago because they said she was too radical. Now, she sat across from Marla with a very different tone. "We'd like to license your audit system," Melinda said, trying to sound confident. "Our board agrees it's time for change." Marla didn't flinch. She simply asked, "Is it time for change because it's right or because it's profitable?" Melinda blinked. "We'll sign the ethics protocol," she said after a pause. Unconditionally. Marla nodded once. That's the only way it works. That night, a special segment aired on national television. A voiceover played over clips of Marla exiting her flight, the crew being suspended, and the airport ethics dashboards lighting up. They humiliated her quietly. She responded globally, and she never raised her voice. Back in her suite, Marla sat alone in front of the same glass window that looked over the Hudson. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply opened her tablet and began drafting a new protocol. Dignity Index, Tier-Based Passenger Protection Act. This one wouldn't just cover airlines. It would include rail, rideshare, cruise lines, and beyond. Because what happened at 38,000 feet wasn't isolated. It was just the most visible example of what people faced every day, being told they didn't belong. And Marla Whitmore had made it her mission to end that. A week later, she received a handwritten letter from a teenage girl in Chicago. It read, "My mom saw what you did and cried. She said someone finally stood up without yelling. I want to be like you someday." Marla read it twice, then folded it and tucked it into a drawer, right next to her original boarding pass from flight PA-17, torn and wrinkled, but never thrown away. Because that torn ticket was the start of a revolution. The lobby at Pacific Aero headquarters was eerily quiet, not because people weren't working. They were, desperately, but because no one wanted to speak unless absolutely necessary. 3 days ago, Marla's ethics audit had been finalized, and the report was devastating. The company's passenger equity compliance score dropped from 78 to 46. That number alone triggered Clause 8 in the Ethos Core Agreement. Any carrier scoring below 50 loses access to the Global Passenger Trust Network for 60 days minimum. Translation: 3 international airports terminated gate contracts. 5 ESG-aligned funds froze a combined $620 million in active investments. 2 credit rating agencies began review for ethical downgrade. And the worst part? Marla hadn't said a word publicly. Inside the 18th floor war room, COO Gregory Hale stared at a screen showing flight cancellations stacking up like dominoes. He'd aged 10 years in a week. "We can't just sit here," he snapped. "We need to go on offense." "Against what?" someone whispered. She never made it about her. Legal leaned forward. "They're calling it the Whitmore effect." Gregory frowned. "What does that mean?" The lawyer shrugged. "It means she doesn't have to fight you. She just rewrote the rules you swore to follow." Meanwhile, Logan was staying with his sister in Birmingham. He couldn't sleep. Every night, the same dream. Gwen's hand tearing the ticket, and Marla saying nothing. That silence had haunted him. Not because it was passive, because it was powerful. And now, he couldn't scroll without seeing some op-ed titled, "What the Airline Didn't Know, The Hidden Hand of Marla Whitmore. Black Woman, Quiet Power, How One Passenger Changed Aviation. From Seat to Senate, Ethics in Flight." He closed his laptop and buried his face in his hands. He had stood right next to Gwen when it happened. He said nothing, and now the world knew it. Across the country, at a tech conference in San Francisco, Marla stepped off the stage to thunderous applause. Her keynote on Silent Systems, Designing Power Without Noise was being called revolutionary. Reporters rushed her, but she only gave one statement. This was never about revenge. It was about reminding the system who it truly serves. Back in New York, at a private roundtable with federal regulators, she presented her newest proposal, Flight Dignity Index, a public-facing scorecard showing how well airlines treat marginalized passengers, veterans, and disabled flyers. Each incident, every complaint, weighted by impact and pattern. Every airline would be ranked. Every score would be public. She slid the draft across the table. One of the regulators asked, "Do you think they'll agree to this?" Marla just raised an eyebrow. "They will, because the next generation of travelers is watching, and they don't forget." Back at Pacific Aero, Gwen had taken a part-time job at a logistics company, working nights and trying not to be recognized. But it was too late. she'd become a meme. On TikTok, users posted reenactments of her moment, ripping the ticket with captions like, "When you think she's nobody, but she built the rules you just broke." She didn't leave her apartment without sunglasses. One day, a barista handed her a coffee with the name "You Don't Belong Here" written on the cup. She tossed it in the trash, but the burn stayed. On the industry side, the ripples turned into waves. The CEO of NorthJet Airlines, Melinda Yates, was forced to issue a public statement acknowledging their past discrimination in hiring. Two major carriers began integrating AI-driven ethics auditing systems, licensed, of course, from Whitmore Systems. One airline, trying to preemptively repair its reputation, announced a Whitmore Fellowship for underrepresented pilots. Marla didn't comment. She didn't need to. She was winning without fighting. Meanwhile, in Washington, the Senate Transportation Committee launched an open hearing on aviation ethics. Marla was called as a key witness. The room was packed. She arrived in a black suit, no makeup, no fanfare. Just data, poise, and presence. A senator leaned in during the break and whispered, "You could run for something, you know." Marla smiled faintly. "I already am," she replied. "I'm running systems." The highlight of the hearing came when an opposing senator scoffed. "Ms. Whitmore, are you suggesting one bad interaction justifies shutting down entire airlines?" Marla leaned forward, calm and direct. "I'm suggesting one bad interaction reveals what's been quietly tolerated for decades. And if that makes the system collapse, then it wasn't strong to begin with." Silence. Even the cameras blinked quietly. By the end of the week, 4 more airlines signed the Whitmore Ethics Accord. The FAA issued new guidelines modeled on her passenger dignity framework. And, perhaps most symbolically, Marla received a message from the president. "Would you consider serving as senior advisor for transportation equity policy?" She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just looked at the offer. Then at the framed photo of her grandmother on the wall. A woman who'd been denied bus seats, restaurant tables, and jobs. For how she looked. Marla whispered, "We're not done yet." The room was cold. Intentionally so. Federal hearing rooms always were. They weren't designed for comfort. They were built for control. But Marla Whitmore didn't flinch under pressure. She had faced worse. Just not always under bright lights and behind engraved wood panels with senators' names burned into brass. Today wasn't just another ethics session. It was the final hearing. The FAA, Department of Transportation, and Senate Subcommittee on Aviation Reform had all gathered under one roof to address a singular question. Should the Whitmore Protocol become mandatory federal law? The stakes? Monumental. If passed, every airline in the country would be bound by real-time ethics monitoring, passenger dignity indexing, immediate accountability reports for discrimination events, transparency audits on staff behavior patterns, an automated strike-based consequence model. No airline wanted that level of scrutiny. But no airline could argue with what happened. Because Marla had already done what no one else could. She made ethics measurable, and she did it publicly. When she stepped into the hearing chamber, even her critics fell silent. Marla wore her usual navy pantsuit, no jewelry, just her signature watch, and the faintest glimmer of calm in her eyes. Senator Collings from Texas, skeptical and outspoken, leaned into his mic. "Ms. Whitmore, let's not pretend the system was perfect before, but you're proposing a complete dismantling of industry discretion. Isn't this overreach?" Marla kept her tone even. "With respect, Senator, it's not overreach when the industry failed to reach in the first place." A murmur. She continued. "People were told for decades, wait, file a complaint. We'll look into it. But systems designed to delay justice are systems built on preserving the status quo." Across the aisle, Senator Althea Boyd, herself a longtime advocate for transit reform, nodded approvingly. "Ms. Whitmore, you stated in your brief that power must exist before the moment of injustice or it will always come too late. Could you elaborate?" Marla didn't hesitate. Every time a mother's child is told they don't belong in first class, every time a veteran is questioned about their disability, every time a woman of color is asked if she's in the wrong seat, the harm has already occurred. The point of ethics isn't reaction, it's prevention. The room stilled. For a moment, you could hear nothing but the faint hum of the overhead lights. Behind the scenes, airline lobbyists scrambled. 3 major carriers had sent legal counsel and silent representatives to observe. Their fate rested on whether this bill passed. In one of the private lounges, the CEO of an international airline muttered to his general counsel, "If this thing goes through, we're going to have to overhaul everything." The lawyer looked down at his tablet. "You should have done that when she gave you the chance last year." Meanwhile, outside the building, dozens of supporters gathered, some holding signs that read, "I belong here. Marla Whitmore saved my daughter's dignity." From one call to Congress, among them was Gwen. She wasn't protesting. She wasn't yelling. She just stood at the back, hood up, eyes fixed on the screen streaming the hearing live. She watched Marla speak with clarity and grace, remembering that day, the torn ticket, the silence, and now, this. Gwen whispered, "I didn't see her. Not really." Back inside, the most dramatic moment came when Marla presented Exhibit 14, a hidden data set gathered over the past 18 months across 42 airports, tracking discriminatory incidents logged by passengers matched with anonymized flight data and facial recognition. The patterns were damning. Black passengers were 17% more likely to be flagged as suspicious in internal staff notes. Elderly passengers requesting assistance were 22% more likely to be denied prompt support if they spoke with a foreign accent. 72% of complaints filed by women under age 40 regarding crew disrespect were dismissed internally without follow-up. One senator's jaw clenched. Another rubbed his temple. Senator Collins looked visibly cornered. "So what you're saying is, we've been letting bias fly, literally." "Yes," Marla said calmly, "and I'm grounding it." At the conclusion of the hearing, Senator Boyd leaned into her mic. "Let the record show that Ms. Whitmore's contributions today weren't just statistical, they were transformational." Then she turned to Marla. "Ms. Whitmore, one final question. If this protocol passes, what's next for you?" Marla took a moment. She looked around the chamber, then locked eyes with Boyd. "I'll keep building, because there's always another gate, another system, and another person waiting to be told they matter." The next morning, headlines read, "Marla Whitmore testifies before Senate. Ethics bills set for emergency vote." From denied seat to national policy, one woman's quiet revolution. The woman who didn't clap back, she called up. Later that week, Marla sat at her usual window at Hudson Plaza, sipping black tea, her tablet resting on the table beside her. She wasn't alone. Across from her sat a young girl, around 10, her hair in braids, her voice quiet but sure. She was the girl who wrote Marla the letter weeks ago. Her mother, standing nearby, said, "She insisted on meeting you. She said your silence gave her courage." Marla knelt beside the girl and said softly, "Then it wasn't silence. It was a signal." The girl smiled. "I want to build something like you." Marla touched her heart and nodded. "You will, and one day, I'll sit where you're standing." The airport was bustling as always. Gate agents called out boarding zones. Suitcases rolled over polished tile. Kids begged for snacks, and pilots strolled past with practiced calm. But inside Gate 17B at JFK, 2 people stood frozen. Logan Kerr and Gwen Rivers. The same gate, the same airline, the same uniforms, only now, not on them. Gwen was in civilian clothes, holding a standby ticket. Logan had just arrived after a week of silence at his father's upstate cabin. They hadn't spoken since their firings. They didn't plan this meeting. But fate has a way of circling back, especially when the flight in question belonged to Nova Star Air, the first airline to publicly adopt the Whitmore Protocol. The irony was suffocating. Logan tried to look away. Gwen stared straight ahead. They both heard it before they saw it. Pre-boarding for first-class passengers begins now. A black woman stepped forward with her daughter. The girl was maybe 8. Bright yellow sundress, butterfly clips in her hair. She held a tiny journal in her hands. As they approached the gate, Gwen instinctively stepped closer, expecting what she always had: resistance, questioning, maybe a smirk. But none came. The gate agent smiled, scanned their tickets, and said warmly, "Thank you for flying with us, Ms. Ellis. Your seats are 2A and 2B. Enjoy." The girl beamed. The mother nodded gratefully, and Gwen's heart sank. That used to be me, watching with disgust when people like her walked up. But this time, Gwen wasn't behind the counter. She was behind the line. Logan watched too, arms crossed. "I don't get it," he muttered. Gwen glanced at him. "Get what?" How this all flipped. One moment, she's just some lady on a flight. Now she's got Congress passing laws and airlines tripping over themselves to impress her. Gwen looked away, her voice low. "She was never just some lady, Logan. She just didn't tell us who she was. We told her who we were." 2 seats over, a young flight attendant, barely 25, spoke to an older crewmate. "Hey, did you hear about the Pacific Aero fallout?" The senior attendant nodded. "They're about to lose international certification at 2 European airports, all because of that score drop." The younger one shook her head. "It's wild. You mess up one time now, and boom, national coverage." The senior crew member paused. "No, you mess up one time with the wrong person, and you find out who the system was actually designed to protect. We just never noticed her before." Inside the cabin, the captain gave his welcome, but something about his tone was different, measured, respectful, as if every word had been rehearsed through a new lens. "Welcome aboard Nova Star 212. We're proud to serve all passengers equally today. If at any moment you feel unsafe, unheard, or unseen, let us know. We're not just flying miles, we're flying values." Gwen clenched her jaw. Logan scoffed under his breath. "Flying values? What is this, a Hallmark movie?" But the man beside them, an older veteran with a cane, looked at Logan directly. "She made them say it, and I hope to God they mean it." Meanwhile, across the city, Marla Whitmore stood in front of the full boardroom at Ethos Core HQ. On the giant screen behind her, graphs showed trends across the last 120 days. Drop in passive discrimination complaints by 63%. Ethics compliance scores increased by 41%. 3 out of 5 airlines voluntarily adopting pre-boarding bias review practices. But more striking than the numbers was the final slide. A rotating feed of passenger photos. Ordinary people who had sent in testimonials. Children, elders, immigrants, veterans, mothers with babies. Each one captioned with a short quote. "First time I didn't feel afraid to board. No one questioned my name. They let me sit with my husband. We're both 80. The pilot thanked me for my service." Marla turned to the room. "These are the metrics that matter, not just fuel efficiency, not just ticket sales, but dignity per passenger." Silence, then applause. Back on the plane, Gwen finally spoke again. "You know what still haunts me?" Logan didn't answer. "When I said, 'You don't belong here,' I thought I was protecting a standard, but all I did was expose a sickness." Logan ran a hand through his hair. She never even raised her voice. Not once. "No," Gwen whispered. She didn't have to. Later that day, Gwen received a message on her phone. It was from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "Reflection Seat Program, Pilot Intake." She hesitated. Clicked. The message read, "We're launching a new initiative, training former flight staff who once failed to now lead others in building ethical awareness. We believe transformation starts from within. If you're willing, there's a seat waiting for you." Gwen stared at it, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel punished. She felt invited. Meanwhile, Logan sat in his car, parked outside a middle school. His younger cousin had asked him to come speak at Career Day. He almost didn't go, but something in him, maybe guilt, maybe growth, had changed. He stepped into the auditorium and saw faces staring back. Black kids, brown kids, white kids, girls in headscarves, boys in wheelchairs. And he didn't lie. He told them about his mistake. The day he stood silent. The day silence spoke louder than any insult. He ended with this: sometimes, the seat you deny someone becomes the platform they use to change the world. Don't be the reason someone has to rise. Be the one who already sees them standing, 10 months later. The newly renamed Whitmore Aviation Ethics Institute sat inside a sleek glass tower overlooking downtown Atlanta. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't designed to impress, but it was built to last. Inside, a small crowd had gathered for a private ribbon-cutting ceremony. There were no cameras, no media. Just a quiet room filled with airline executives, federal regulators, retired pilots, advocacy leaders, and a few people who had once been harmed in silence. At the center stood Marla Whitmore, dressed in white, not for attention, for clarity. Her speech was simple. This isn't a victory lap. It's a runway. For better flight, fairer skies, and quieter strength. She cut the ribbon. The applause wasn't loud, but it was long. Outside the building, a young man named Andre stood, watching from a distance. He was 19 now. Almost didn't recognize himself in the reflection on the glass. Last year, he'd written Marla a letter. Back then, he was just a passenger and coach. His mother, disabled, on oxygen, had been humiliated by a crew that treated her like a burden. They were moved to the back. No help, no apology. Now, Andre had been accepted as one of the first fellows in the Passenger Ethics Youth Cohort, part of the Institute's training branch. He hadn't told his mom yet. He wanted her to see him walk in through the front doors, as someone invited. Across the country, a viral clip had just hit 12 million views. A man had filmed a crew member speaking disrespectfully to a Korean-American family during boarding. Within 24 hours, the crew was suspended, automatically, by the system Marla helped build. The airline's CEO released a statement not of defense, but accountability. Our system flagged the incident. Our culture must now reflect our values. We thank Ms. Whitmore for making this system possible. It was the first time a major carrier publicly credited a black woman for systemic transformation. The clip's top comment? They told her she didn't belong in first class. Now she is the standard. Meanwhile, Gwen stood in a navy blazer in front of a training room at Novastar HQ. She'd finished her certification. Not just a staff trainer now, but a specialist in conflict de-escalation and unconscious bias protocols. She faced a group of new hires, 24 fresh uniforms, eyes wide. Gwen took a breath. I used to work the front. Told myself I was just enforcing rules. What I didn't realize was, rules without reflection become walls. You're not just checking tickets. You're checking your humanity at the gate if you don't stay aware. Someone raised a hand. Did you ever mess up? Gwen paused, then nodded. Yeah, I did. I hurt someone who didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She had something better. She had patience and a plan. Elsewhere, in D.C., the final version of the Passenger Ethics Charter was passed into law. Dubbed informally as the Whitmore Standard, it required all domestic airlines to adopt real-time behavior monitoring for discrimination, mandatory staff retraining every 18 months, passenger dignity scores contributing to FAA compliance reports, emergency strike-based alerts directly tied to funding access. One senator during the final vote said, "For years, we thought fairness meant treat everyone the same. What Ms. Whitmore taught us is fairness means seeing who's been invisible and doing something about it." Back in Atlanta, Marla walked quietly through the Institute's East Wing, now dedicated to case archives and real-time reporting systems. On the wall was a single bronze plaque, Seat 2A, the beginning of reform. It wasn't elaborate, just a replica of the first-class seat she was denied, preserved behind glass. Next to it, a small touch panel. Visitors could press it to hear a 30-second voice clip. I didn't need to yell, I just needed to be seen. And when they didn't see me, I made sure the system would. That afternoon, She received a handwritten note slid under her office door. It read, "Dear Ms. Whitmore, my daughter was born last week. We named her Marla. Not because of the news or the policies, but because one day I want her to grow up in a world where people don't have to fight just to sit down. Thank you for building that world." She folded the note, closed her eyes, and let herself cry for the first time since that flight. Later that evening, Marla took a quiet drive to a small hill just outside the city. It overlooked a flight path, planes rising and landing like breaths in the sky. She pulled out her phone and opened a file. Inside it was the draft of her next project, the Right to Arrive Protocol, a proposed framework for international carriers focused on protecting immigrants, refugees, and non-native English speakers from dehumanizing travel experiences. She whispered to herself, "One flight changed my path. Maybe now I can change theirs." Behind her, a plane soared overhead. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. She knew it was flying on new air. It had been exactly 1 year to the day. The airline, the seat, the silence. All of it felt like a lifetime ago, and yet like yesterday. Marla Whitmore stood alone on the tarmac of Skybridge Academy, the first training center in the U.S., fully built on ethical aviation practices, named in her honor not with a gold plaque but with a single sentence etched into the entrance. We remember her not because she fought, but because she never had to raise her voice. Inside, hundreds of cadets trained on simulators, not just for technical scenarios, but for ethical ones. A disabled passenger being dismissed, a mother being separated from her child, a man being doubted for his accent. They didn't just train for turbulence, they trained for humanity. In the boardroom of Pacific Aero, things were very different. The logo remained, but the leadership didn't. The old CEO quietly retired. The PR head? Replaced. Gwen, now consultant for Novastar's internal reform branch. But what hit hardest was this. They were no longer leaders in the domestic flight industry. That title belonged to Novastar, Civic Air, and the newly rising Equijet, all of which had adopted the Whitmore Protocol early and publicly. Investors followed values now, and values had a name. That same week, in Nairobi, a girl named Imani boarded her first international flight to study aerospace engineering. Before she even took her seat, she noticed a laminated card in the seat back pocket. It read, "Passenger Ethics Charter, Section 3.4, Seat Discrimination Protections. In the event you feel unfairly targeted, separated, or dismissed based on race, gender, disability, or identity, press the Ethics tab on your screen. Your case will be logged immediately and reviewed by a real-time panel under the Whitmore Flight Integrity Network." Imani didn't know who Marla Whitmore was, but she smiled, because someone, somewhere, had made sure her dignity was already accounted for. Back in the States, Marla sat across from a high school auditorium, watching her goddaughter speak at Career Day. The girl, barely 16, stood confidently in front of a mic and said, "I want to build systems that protect people before they're harmed, not after. Like my auntie does, she made it so even if no one believes you, a system will." The crowd clapped. Marla didn't. She just sat still, letting the moment wash over her. That was always enough. Later that evening, on a quiet podcast called Voices of the Sky, a retired gate agent named Henrietta was asked, "What's the biggest change you've seen in the past year?" Henrietta paused, then said, "For decades, the power was in the scanner. Now it's in the silence. People listen differently now because they know someone's watching with purpose. And we all know where that shift began, with a woman in seat 2A who said nothing but changed everything. That night, Marla sat on her apartment balcony, a soft breeze rolling off the skyline. She held her phone scrolling through a live dashboard. Airlines, scores, real-time ethics reports. The system was working. Quietly, but consistently. Then her screen flashed. Alert. Airline E231 requesting Whitmore Protocol Advisory Audit. She smiled, didn't even flinch. She tapped approve. And that was it. No breaking news, no headlines, just one woman sitting in the dark, sending dignity through the sky. She didn't scream, she didn't threaten, she just made a single call and changed the system forever. Would you have stayed silent like Marla or spoken up? Tell us where you're watching from and how this story made you feel.